By popular request, I have updated and reproduced my video Ice Age of the Dimmer Sun in 30 Years with a new voice, a new form, with leading-edge discoveries in science added, and with a new musical theme. And to make the content more accessible, I have divided the video's 10 parts into a series of 10 individual videos. The science focus of the series, of course, remains the same as in the original video, being centered on the primal fields that are understood as one of the most fundamental aspects of the science of the universe, the galaxies, the solar system, the sun, and the effects of the sun on the Earth, ranging from the color of the sunlight to solar cosmic ray flux affecting our climate that we enjoy and also fear. So what are these all-pervading primal fields then that seem to be affecting everything? In December 2012, the plasma physicist David LaPoint published a series of videos about a phenomenon that he called the primal fields. With his discovery, he takes aim at long-held mistaken theories about the physical universe, including black holes, dark matter, and dark energy, which are not required to interpret the observed evidence of the universe. In his videos, David LaPoint illustrates the existence and the operating principles of the most basic electromagnetic fields that shape the solar system, the galactic system, and ultimately the cosmic environment. He suggests that these basic primal fields, which he discusses, are fundamental to the order and operation of the universe, and are even reflected in the transmission of light and the structure of matter itself, all the way down to its smallest subatomic forms. On a gigantic scale, the electromagnetic fields that he recognized to exist and has explored in the laboratory shape entire galaxies. They are also fundamental to almost everything, so that he calls them the primal fields. In fact, without the primal fields and their effects, our sun, the planets, even the galaxy itself might not have been created, so that nothing would actually exist without them. Star formations in a galaxy typically occurs in intensely focused and compressed plasma that the primal fields facilitate, to the point that nuclear fusion occurs, by which atoms, stars, planets, and entire galaxies are formed. The term primal fields is also justified because on the smaller scale of our solar system, the operation of the primal fields, though they are correspondingly smaller in size than on the galactic scale seen here, is critical for the dynamic operation of our solar system as a single functional unit. David LaPoint also discovered that the principles of the fields that he calls the primal fields is such that the galactic plasma streams that flow through the solar system become concentrated to a high degree of density around the sun, which he replicated in principle in laboratory experiments. The result of his work brings a radically new dimension to the perception of the sun and also of the dynamics of the ice ages. The perception of the sun as an electrically powered star has existed for a long time already. A large body of evidence exists to support the electric sun theory. But it had a weak point. For the theory to work, a high concentration of electric plasma is required to exist around the sun. This put the theory in doubt. As an alternative, the theory of the nuclear fusion-powered sun was created, except the observed evidence doesn't support this theory either. The sunspots on the surface of the sun show the sun to be darker below the surface. We should see the opposite if the sun was internally powered, instead of being electrically powered at the surface from the outside. Also, the fusion sun theory cannot readily explain the 11-year solar activity cycles, in which the brightness of the sun varies by a factor of 20 when observed in the high ultraviolet band. The internal fusion sun theory has it that the photon travel time from the sun's deemed fusion center at the core to the surface is deemed to be in the range between 10,000 and 170,000 years, while the assumed energy transfer time itself from the center to the sun to the surface is deemed to be on the order of 30 million years. This hardly supports the 11-year solar cycles, in which even the sun's magnetic field changes direction at every single cycle. The contribution that David LaPoint brings to the table weighs enormously in support of the electric sun theory by illustrating how the high-density plasma field is created around the sun that the theory depends on. The primal fields theory takes away the barrier against the electric sun theory, which thereby becomes totally plausible, together with a number of related theories that thereby likewise become plausible. However, the primal fields theory takes us one critical step beyond merely supporting the electric sun theory. It renders the functioning of the electric sun subject to a minimal threshold of conditions that must be met for the sun to be powered, which, when it is not met, causes the sun to become inactive and cold. While David LaPoint may not have intended to support the electric sun theory, his work illustrates that the process that creates a dense plasma sphere around the sun happens, because the primal fields have that effect. It is known in plasma physics that these fields themselves depend for their existence on a minimal density in the plasma that flows through the system. If the threshold is not reached, the fields do not form. If the fields do not form or cannot be maintained, the sun does not have the conditions established for it to be powered. The sun simply turns off then to an inactive state, in which it glows dimly by its stored-up energy and some nuclear decay processes within it. The required threshold, therefore, becomes an important factor in considering the dynamics of the ice ages. Just imagine the consequences on Earth when our brilliant sun is suddenly turned off as the primal fields collapse, and loses more than 2/3 of its energy output in possibly a single day. The conventional theories of the Ice Age dynamics all regard the Ice Age glaciation as the result of a gradual cooling of the Earth. One theory sees the cooling being caused by cyclical variations of the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, with the Sun remaining an invariable constant by this theory. In the internal fusion Sun theory, the Sun is deemed to be an invariable constant, so that the ice ages are caused by anything else except the Sun. The resulting orbital variation theory, known as the Milankovitch theory, however, has so many holes in its fabric that it is generally no longer seriously considered as the cause for the ice ages. The standard electric sun theory doesn't have this problem. Plenty of evidence exists that the power output of the sun does vary with the density of the electric input. The large temperature fluctuations that are known to have occurred over the last 500 million years are evidently the result of cyclical electric input fluctuations. The primal fields theory does not change that, but it does open the gate to the recognition that the entire process of the powered sun can collapse when a minimal power input threshold is not met, as we have seen happening during the ice ages. The primal fields theory brings a huge difference to the table. In the past, it was believed that ice age conditions develop slowly and gradually over extended periods, so that humanity can adjust itself to the changing conditions, even in cases when the Earth becomes 5 times colder than the little ice age had been over the span of 50 years. The primal fields theory jolts us out of this dream, or at least it should. If the fields are not maintained sufficiently, so that they collapse and vanish, extremely radical changes occur in as short a time as possibly a single day. The primal fields theory takes away the general notion that we have a long time to prepare for the coming ice age and don't need to be responsive yet. The primal fields theory tells us that the opposite is true, that we need to get prepared as fast as possible, which almost no one is yet willing to even consider. In this context, the primal fields theory presents us a great blessing in disguise. It forces us, if we are willing to respond, to redevelop our humanity as fast as possible, which we urgently need in the present to avoid the catastrophe of nuclear war that no one will likely survive, for which the preparations are ever more intensely pursued in numerous ways. In this regard, the potentially near rapid ice age transition that the primal fields theory brings into view offers us an incentive to get our act together, which would be the greatest salvation that we could experience on every front where civilization is presently fast collapsing. The primal fields theory illustrates a single basic principle That applies to all complex systems, including civilization. In economics, when the creative and productive power of a nation diminishes below a minimal threshold, the entire economic system disintegrates. It becomes inactive. The nations collapse. The world becomes cold. The people die. This happens to cultures too, when the recognized value of our humanity drops below a minimal threshold. Nuclear war then happens when the humanist culture disintegrates. We are close to the minimal threshold on a number of these vital fronts, especially in economics. For example, when the assumed value of money drops below the point where the value of money becomes uncertain in the markets, it becomes meaningless at this point. At this point, then, the financial markets collapse. Banks close, stores close, gas stations close, transportation collapses, the food supply system stops. The entire platform of physical infrastructures becomes inactive. The world's money value system can unravel in a single day. No one knows how close we are to this day. The Glass-Steagall law that once protected the value of money in the USA has been repealed in Congress in 1999 by a bunch of traders who were bribed to do so with a $350 million slush fund. To date, all efforts have failed to restore even this minimal protection of the value of currency that the repealed law had afforded for 66 years in which it was active. Against the background of the now fast collapsing value of money, the entire economic system can collapse in a single day, just as the presently powered sun can go inactive in a day when the fields collapse that prime its operational environment. David LaPoint's work illustrates that the electric sun, which varies only slightly during the interglacial warm period that we are presently enjoying, will with great certainty go completely inactive when the plasma density of the electric streams feeding into the solar system fall below the threshold level where the primal fields collapse. In astrophysics, that's the point where the Ice Age transition begins. That's what happened 120,000 years ago. The current trend suggests that we will cross the cutoff threshold in the near future. In the near future, an ice age begins when the minimal conditions no longer exist for the system to function that powers the sun. The sun reverts to its default state then, its inactive state. It turns dim in a single short step, and the climate on Earth, that loses 2/3 of its energy input, turns cold. At this point, rapid, deep cooling begins all across the Earth. Before this point is upon us, all the preparations for the dramatic changes in the Earth's environment will have to be completed. To fail is not an option if we want to continue to live. For this reason, it is not an option either that we raise the value of our humanity far above the present level and protect it on all fronts. And this needs to begin now. The analysis of ice cores drilled from the ice sheets of Greenland indicates that the Sun became inactive 120,000 years ago. That's when the last ice age started. The ice core records also tell us that the Sun became activated for short periods every 1,470 years throughout the entire glaciation period. The periodic rewarming may have prevented the Earth from freezing up completely. The inactive periods of the Sun were nevertheless long enough to create the huge cooling on Earth that lays up ice sheets across the northern hemisphere more than 10,000 feet deep, which are known to have existed. It is here that the theoretical becomes important for us all in a critical, practical manner. The present trend suggests that a turn-off transition that makes the Sun inactive might be upon us in 30 to 50 years' time. When this happens, the entire world will have to live with a dimmer Sun on a colder Earth. Of course, this poses some challenges for maintaining our food supply. The chlorophyll in plants will have to function at reduced energy levels and with a shifted radiation spectrum. Here a great challenge arises for humanity as a whole to work together to create infrastructures that are needed to maintain our food supply in the coming dimmer and colder world. While it is technologically and economically possible to meet the challenge to protect our world, our civilization, and our future, the question remains to be answered whether we will do what is needed to maintain our existence. The answer must be, yes, we will do this. Yes, we will do what is critically necessary for us to do to survive. We will even do it for far lesser reasons, such as for becoming free of the terrible strangulation of our world that constricted scientific perception has brought upon it. Truthful science supplies the potential to open the door for the liberation of humanity that false science inflicts massively and globally. Our physical civilization is largely built on science, first and foremost, just as our social civilization is built on love. But what is love? We cannot weigh it, measure it, quantify it, but we do know that it is so immensely substantial that civilization would collapse without it. Much of the same can be said about science. Without science standing at the heart of it, civilization, with all its numerous freedoms, would not exist. That false science is destructive is well recognized by those who would destroy civilization with it. False science has a destructive effect. With society raising itself out of the trap of false science, a path opens before it to universal liberty by scientific and technological progress, towards the brightest cultural renaissance of all times. That's not being too optimistic. The potential exists. The principle is applied. It reflects the power of our humanity as human beings. Our present world is full of examples of false science being massively applied to forcefully strangle civilization, and to a large degree voluntarily. One false science concept is that the amazing recovery of the climate of the Earth from the devastating Little Ice Age in the 1600s until 1998 was a man-made phenomenon caused by human economy and energy applied for living that must be eliminated. But false science remains false, regardless of how deeply it has penetrated society and controls its responses. Unrestricted science demonstrates with recognizable certainty that the rewarming of the Earth from its icehouse conditions in the 1600s was not a human achievement, and definitely was not a consequence of mankind's industrial development and its burning of carbon fuels, but was absolutely and measurably and scientific demonstrably a solar-forced climate effect that has staged the great global warming that enabled modern society and its efficient agriculture to become possible. When honest science displaces constricted science, a great liberation becomes potentially possible. In the carbon-14 documented example of the solar-forced great global warming, which comes to light as a matter of basic fact in unconstricted science, the liberating effect of truth lifts the burden from humanity of being a climate villain on the earth that false science has brought upon it like an indictment against humanity, for which the nations are presently induced to stop the burning of carbon fuels and thereby commit economic suicide. Yes, the Greenland ice sheet has experienced some melting of its ice masses that were built up in the deep cold of the Little Ice Age, with the Arctic's sea ice likewise experiencing some thinning out, as it is shown here. However, one doesn't need to have a Master of Science degree to recognize that such effects are in line with the measured increase in solar activity that supplies our climate in the first place. The primal fields stand in the background to the unfolding scientific recognition of the natural dynamics of the forever ongoing climate changes on Earth, slow as the recognition process may be. Humanity certainly does not have the capacity, by any means within its grasp, to affect the climate on Earth. The Earth's climate changes, with the effects forced on it by the dynamics of the sun. Humanity never was a climate factor. The carbon gases, such as CO2, that humanity generates by its living, are not a climate factor either, and never have been or ever will be. With its simple, wide-open scientific recognition, honest science presents itself with the potential to liberate humanity from many constricting dogmas, including that for the most horrific Holocaust in the history of the world that is presently ongoing. In the name of reducing CO2 emissions by automobiles, vast amounts of agricultural resources are being diverted from the nourishment of people to be burned in the form of biofuels. The burnt food resources would nourish upwards to 400 million people if they were not burned. In a world that has 1 billion people living in chronic starvation, the food burning unfolds as a holocaust in which 100 million people are forced to die by starvation. The result exceeds the Nazi Holocaust 100-fold, and Napoleon's total war holocaust 1,000-fold. Honest science can bring an end to this tragedy that false science has invoked. And here too, the primal fields stand in the background to the liberation that simple, truthful science recognition can inspire. The primal fields stand in this scene as the electric motivator that in part drives the gigantic global seawater recycling system that transports cold, CO2-rich seawater from the ice-cold polar oceans that are able to dissolve CO2 more readily into the tropical oceans, where the cold waters warm up and release the high concentration of CO2 that rides along in the recycling streams. The cold, deep currents flow slowly. They flow so slowly that the dissolved CO2 from Antarctica will remain in transit for roughly 350 years until it becomes released back into the air in the tropical oceans near Africa. For the waters from the Arctic, the recycle time likely exceeds 1,000 years. This means that the high rate of CO2 being dissolved into the oceans during the Little Ice Age and earlier cold periods is coming back to us, into the atmosphere in our time, 350 years later. With this simple scientific recognition in unconstricted science, the noted long recycle delay completely exonerates humanity from the charge of having caused the large increase in atmospheric CO2 that is measured in the modern world. Here, simple science puts the cause where it belongs, into the court of the natural system, and not into the court of human activity and human energy production. And as I said before, the primal fields stand in the background as an element of the electric cosmic process that powers the recycling system. Nor is the CO2 in the air an actual climate factor anyway. It is not physically possible for it to be that. While CO2 is a greenhouse gas that absorbs radiated light energy and reflects it back in a scattered fashion, it is also a scientific fact that its action in the overall context of the greenhouse climate system is extremely minute, in the order of a millionth part of it. For all practical purposes, CO2 has no climate effect, and certainly not one that is actually measurable. Its absorption coefficient is 10 times weaker than that of the water vapor, which is 100 times more densely present in the atmosphere, and is 20 times more widely responsive across the spectrum. And all this is vastly overshadowed by oxygen, with an absorption coefficient as high as water vapor, but with a 5-fold greater density in the air. And not less significant is the Rayleigh scattering effect of oxygen and nitrogen in the air that adds to the greenhouse radiation. CO2 adds up to nothing in comparison. Constricted science sometimes claims that CO2 captures outgoing energy radiated back from the Earth. It is not acknowledged, however, that outgoing radiation contributes only 9% of the atmosphere's total heat budget. But there too, CO2 is vastly overshadowed by water vapor. Most of the outgoing energy has actually nothing to do with greenhouse gases at all, not even with water vapor. The largest climate factor is the effect of cloudiness. The white top of clouds directly reflect a portion of the incoming solar energy back into space, which is thereby lost to us. The amount of cloudiness has a huge effect on the climate. Cloudiness also has a large effect on the atmospheric heat budget. Slightly less than half of the atmospheric heat budget is supplied by latent energy that is released when water vapor condenses back into liquid droplets. The heat is generated in the clouds, high in the atmosphere, and is to a large degree cooled off into the colder regions above the clouds. The primal fields stand in the background of the process that largely affects and controls cloudiness on Earth as the biggest climate factor. CO2, in comparison, adds up to nothing. Its effect is that minuscule. It doesn't even enter the scene where effects are measurable. Even if the CO2 density in the air was increased 2,000%, the increase would have no measurable effect on the climate. A 2,000% increase of a millionth part still doesn't add up to anything significant. The increase would still remain below what is measurable in the context of the total climate effects. The 2,000% increase, which adds up to a 20-fold increase of the global atmospheric CO2, would of course become supremely measurable in the arena where CO2 does actually have a measurable effect. We presently live in a severely CO2-starved world with the lowest atmospheric concentration in hundreds of millions of years. The world is presently so severely CO2-starved that when greenhouse operators increase the CO2 density in their facilities a mere twofold, a 50% increase in plant growth results. Imagine what a 20-fold increase would accomplish, of the type that we had in historic times, or even just a 10-fold increase as we had it in Jurassic time. Then the world would become wonderfully green again, with richer harvests for human living. That's where CO2 is a factor. It's not a climate factor. It simply isn't a climate factor. Cloudiness is the big and huge variable climate factor. Since the primal fields are a part of the system that affects cloudiness on Earth, the subject of the primal fields is an important subject in science to be considered, even on the smaller scene that is not directly related to Ice Age dynamics, which, however, are ultimately linked to it. The wide range of considerations that come into focus here in the context of the primal fields, of which the dimming sun is of course the ultimate concern, evidently determines the wide range of topics that this video series must focus on, and does so. The video series focuses on the theories and the evidences and how they will impact us all when the changing conditions unfold as they are scientifically understood to unfold by the nature of the principles involved. In the final video of the series, I will also focus in retrospect on the dimension of our response to the known conditions that affect our future, which are known by their principles. The human response factor to what is fully known remains presently the biggest open question of them all. Will we become true to ourselves as human beings, true to what we know, and direct our future with what we know? The answer is critical for the very existence of humanity in the near future. It also has the potential to be an open door to the brightest scientific, technological, economic, and cultural renaissance of all times. As I said in one of my novels, in essence, a scientist is an economist. We utilize science to protect and enrich our world for the wider benefit of humanity as a whole, which invariably is to our own benefit. This means that economists should also be scientists, which may be required in the future, even for politicians, as an entrance criterion.